Okay. We still have 3 minutes, don't we?
No, it's like 50 seconds or something.
Really? My clock says 6:58.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, gosh darn it. "90 seconds." Okay, Jesse. Do, 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 do.
Now, can you make it full screen?
Yeah, I hope so. Okay. Oh, here.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, and an ad, of course. Damn it.
Weeds can really make a mess of your crop. Gross.
Okay. We're like queued up. Jesse's going to give us the cue and we're going to be on. "20 seconds.
I'm noticing the gray line though of it streaming going across. Does it mean that it's not going to start at the beginning?
No, I think it's going to be good. I think it's going to be good.
Do you see what I'm talking about?
I see what you're saying.
It keeps advancing forward. See it? It just jumped.
Okay.
Okay, and welcome.
We acknowledge that we're gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains.
We respect the Blackfoot people's past, present, and future. We recognize the thousands of Indigenous peoples
From many diverse nations, all left their home, including members of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Akana,
I'm stopping.
as well as other First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We respect Indigenous peoples' cultural heritage,
Beliefs
truth,
and relationship to the land.
It stretches back in time.
And we will learn from it. Oki is an invitation.
a step forward.
In Blackfoot, Oki means hello.
Hello.
Oki.
Okay.
Oki. Oki. Welcome to the lands of the Blackfoot people.
Okay, and welcome to Could This Be Grace? My name is Alan Friesen. I am here with all of the discernible talent and qualifications of this show right here, Dr. Diane McConnell. Thank you, Diane, for joining me, because without it, there's no show without you. You got the talent and all the smarts. So Diane has written a book called Could This Be Grace, about experiences that she had with her two sons who had horrendous health challenges and then ultimately passed quite young. And so this is kind of the distillation of what she learned through that experience. And this is number 5 of 6, 5 of a 6-part series today. So Diane, lead it. Thanks for being with me, and carry on.
Awesome. Thanks, Alan. I'm just going to share my screen.
Ooh, and the technology is working.
Awesome. Great. So, Alan, it's always a pleasure to see you. And I always enjoy our conversations. They are inspiring, and it's been a real privilege for me to join you. So thank you for the invitation always. And I just can't believe that it's been 5 weeks and we only have one more of our 6-week series to go. Where does the time go?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, over the past couple of weeks, as you know, I have introduced my family to our audience, and I've talked about the importance of getting to know yourself, slowing down and taking time to get to know others, know the other, and creating that compassionate space between yourself and others so that they feel seen and heard. And I shared details of my family's journey, outlining a long history and a string of very challenging and adverse situations and experiences. And so in last week's session, I spent the time talking about the experience of adversity, and of course offered this definition of adversity so that we're all on the same page. Adversity is a noun that means difficulties or misfortune. An adverse situation or experience is unfavorable, unfortunate, or distressful, and every one of us is facing an adverse situation right now in the pandemic. In review of last week, I outlined that in the face of adversity, things change. The routines that we've come to depend on and the behaviors that align with our perceived identity that are familiar and that make sense are different, and they change. We have connections with colleagues, friends, or family that are there to provide various kinds of support to us. And I also stated that when we encounter an unfavorable or an unfortunate experience, those aspects of our life that we've grown really comfortable with and that we depend on may change, or they may not even be there. Our identity may be threatened, and I talked about my role as a mom and how I felt threatened there, my role as a teacher and how that changed for me. And I think when your identity is threatened, the thing that I outlined or mentioned is that it creates doubt and it creates worry. And for me, a tremendous amount of anxiety. So the anxiety for me on a scale of 1 to 10, many times was hitting 10 plus. Also, anxiety, I think I mentioned, is an emotion that lives in the future. And so that always leaves you wondering, questioning, or anticipating what's going to happen, what's going to happen, what's going to be next. And so that cycle just repeats itself. A really important note from last week's session is that when we are facing adversity, which is challenging your belief system, it can be dysregulated and for some disorienting, and I just talked about that. And regardless, it's an uncomfortable and an emotional experience. And I was giving examples about locus of control, internal locus of control, where you see yourself as part of the solution and you feel that you have some control, that you have some say, that you're part of the process, or external locus of control. And I gave examples of that, which with our older son in our journey earlier on in the journey, where I was looking to others to solve the problem, to make it right, to fix it for us. And so I think in terms of facing adversity, looking at ourselves, thinking about what's our position in this experience. Am I seeing myself as part of it, or am I expecting that the solution or the answer is going to come from outside of myself?
I think last week, Diane, if I recall correctly, I believe you used the word agency. Does that ring a bell for you? That where you're referring to the, our capacity or our agency is our ability to respond, our capacity to,
Yes.
I believe that's what you'd referenced, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
Or it might have been some other smart person I was listening to. I don't know, but yeah, we'll credit you for it.
Fine. Good listening. Anyway, so tonight's topic are the perceived problems of practice. And as I reflected when I was writing the book, and as I was reflecting and I looked back both at my experience as teacher and my experience as mother and my relationships and my interactions with healthcare professionals, I identified for myself many problems of practice that really created barriers and made it very challenging for us as a family trying to navigate both systems, both the education system and the healthcare system. So I named those and I give examples. So the first kind of area is in teaching, the perceived problems of practice for myself. Number one would be capacity. So as a teacher, the example I gave was, I'm teaching, I've got my pedagogy, I'm really comfortable with what I'm doing. I am anticipating and expecting that my class will be a homogeneous group of students, and I was really comfortable in terms of what I was going to be doing and what I was expecting to receive back from them from my delivery of program. And the day that I encountered a student coming into my class with very significant needs, I panicked and I talked about that. It didn't fit. And I really didn't believe that I had the capacity or the ability to be able to teach her. And so the end result was I had a belief then that she didn't belong. So that really creates a barrier. The other problem of practice for myself, and I've seen it in colleagues, is a state of overwhelm. So if you have a classroom with many students with diverse needs, and they're all at different places at different times, and you haven't the experience and the background in terms of navigating that and figuring out what that looks like, it can create a situation for myself of overwhelm. Our son, Ben, a good example here.
Hey, Diane, I have kind of you have a lifelong teaching education. Just when you're just saying that, you're always going to have in every classroom, there's going to be differences in terms of language abilities and just entrance, just capacities between any group of students, right? So
yep.
Is it, I guess, how back in the day, there's used to be kind of like one room classrooms kind of a thing, right? You had all grades kind of a thing. And I guess kids would learn from each other. So is putting all kids of the same age together, is that the best, in a perfect world, is that the best way education occurs? I know I'm a little off track. I'm just asking the question. I just thought you might have an insight on that. That's all.
Well, it's a really good question. My thinking in terms of what I'm talking about here is my practice as a teacher, a grade 3 teacher, was that I was the deliverer of grade 3 curriculum.
Right.
And I really understood grade 3 curriculum. And my belief was all the little grade 3s in front of me were at pretty much the same place. And I had a method and a way of delivering that curriculum. And I had a belief that they should all be able to grasp it. But if you have students in the classroom, and it makes good sense to me that we are a very diverse culture, community, a classroom of little students, that they won't be all at the same place at the same time. They'll be at different places, and they've got different experiences. And I talked about this in terms of their backstories and what's happened to them to create what it is that we're looking at. And there's, the numbers and the degree of diversity are always on the rise, and there's a number of reasons, socioeconomic reasons, the advances in the healthcare system that support students that typically historically wouldn't have been in classrooms. They would have been in an institutional placement, or they might not have survived. And expectations of parents. There's so many reasons that are fueling the degree of diversity in our classrooms. Mm-hmm. And I feel like if a teacher isn't supported or part of a team or has the mindset or the insight that they're able to do this, or they have tools and ways to do this, then it can be really overwhelming.
Sure. No, it makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense.
And you asked the question about grouping students of a certain age in a classroom. And I know that there is research out there that would say that's like, why do we do that?
Yeah.
That's kind of crazy making. It is,
Like it's a simple way to run the system. It's a simple rule to run the system, but does it result in, kids who have their interests and abilities and capacities further encouraged, right? And further, I don't know. I'm taking us off on a tangent. I just was throwing that out there. So.
Yeah, and it's okay. I mean, it's a good tangent. What I was looking for was assembly line.
Mm-hmm.
You put all the 6-year-olds together, and then you move them through the system. Mm-hmm. From one stop to the next, to the next, and you all give them all the same information, and they're supposed to pop out at the end. I mean, there's lots of research and literature that talks about that.
Yeah.
And that we're not embracing individual strengths and places in time and space.
Right.
So,
and you think about it, if you had to teach a group that came from the same background you had, same experiences you had, that you could use experiences you had, and they had the same, whatever, let's say it's an animal husbandry trait thing, right? You've raised a calf and they've raised a calf, kind of a thing. You have a common discussion point that they would understand how that process works, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Whereas if people have all these varying type experiences as they're going to, then it making that connection as the teacher at the head of the classroom becomes that much more challenging, right? So.
Absolutely. So
yes.
It's a perceived problem of practice. The very thinking that we're talking about.
Yes.
If our teachers are expecting that it will be a homogeneous group and everybody's at approximately the same place in space and time, then it's a problem in practice, because that's not the reality.
Right. Yeah. Well said.
Yeah. So the next one is the human rights, and a story that I can share with respect to this is Ben, as a totally blind student, when he was in high school in grade 11 math. At the time, the curriculum was dictating, incorporating the use of a graphic calculator. And his teacher didn't know how a blind student was going to be able to use a graphic calculator, which is visual. And there wasn't any auditory input. So he continued to teach, he continued to work with Ben after school, or in spares, when Ben had a spare, and he'd go and he'd work with the teacher, and he gave him the same exams and expected the same level of performance that he did from the other students, and he was failing. And I went to a parent-teacher interview, and Ben at the time had a mark of about 32%. And I said to the teacher, I'd like you to tell me what kind of student you think Ben is. And he said, I think he's a bright student. I think he's, really capable. And I said, so how do you know that? What's the evidence that would lead you to believe that he's capable? Well, he said, I spend time with him one-on-one. He always comes for help. He asks good questions. And when we're talking through problems, he really cognitively is demonstrating that he's able to do it. And then I said to him, do you believe that he's capable of learning the things that you're teaching him? And the teacher said, yes, I believe that he is. And I said, but that's not what his mark says. Why does he have a mark of 32% then? Mm-hmm. And the teacher said to me, well, he's blind, And I said, pardon? And he said, yeah, he's blind. Well, he can't see the graphic calculator, so he has to do it in his head. And so we had a problem at that point, and stepped in and offered the teacher some support and ways that he might be able to create access for Ben, solve the problem. And he continued on through his high school career and did extremely well in math once that was resolved. But my point and my example is that could theoretically have become a human rights issue.
Sure. Yeah.
And in families that don't have an awareness of education, would not themselves know how to resolve the problem for Ben, we had the advantage and the ability to do that. And we viewed we're all in this together. So we were supporting the teacher. But if you had a family that were overwhelmed, frustrated, angry, thinking that he was not having his needs met, it really typically could have been a human rights. And I think there's a fear out there. Myself, always will that happen to me with some of the decisions I make because I don't understand and I'm not aware. So does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I get you. Yeah.
Okay. So another example.
Oh, just to back up for 1 second, Diane. One thing too, though, when you're talking about, navigating this system, and some people would have a harder time with it. Well, you are like a super navigator of the educational system, of course, right? You understand the system in and out. So for a parent, as you said, let's say a single parent, and they're stressed out with life and they're having a tough time paying bills. This is just another, the kid's not fitting in for me to be able to live my life kind of a thing, right? Or, you know what I mean? It's a way, way more challenging type situation.
Yep.
Yeah.
You're right. A super navigator. I kind of like that title.
Super navigator. Yeah. You put that on your business cards. You put that on your business cards, right? Yeah.
A t-shirt. I'll get a t-shirt. Anyway, another perceived problem in practice is siloed supports and services. And this has everything to do with what I had talked earlier about in terms of locus of control, where as a teacher, I thought, this is my job, homogeneous group. And if there's a diverse needs, it's somebody else's problem. And so a consultant comes in, spends some time, or an itinerant teacher, or a service provider like a speech and language pathologist or a mental health therapist, and it's very siloed. So with a very complex student, you might see 2, 3, 4 different kinds of support that show up, and it's all very siloed, and they aren't working together. We don't create the concept of we're all in this together.
Mm.
And with that kind of thinking, it's a very legitimate perceived problem of practice. And the final one, I couldn't not put this there for me, is I was scared.
Sure.
So when that student showed up in my classroom, I was scared because I thought, I'm not going to do a good job. Right. I don't know what to do. What if people think I'm a terrible teacher? And so there's a real element of fear. And so my solution is don't go there. Mm-hmm. Avoid the situation. Instead of saying, come on in and we'll figure it out, and creating vulnerability in me, I stayed safe to say it's somebody else's job to do, not my job.
Yeah. Yeah. No, can understand that. And that would be a normal reaction, wouldn't it? Right? Like, this is going to be scary. This is going to be something I don't want to put myself at risk, right? By failing, no, I can understand.
Because as a teacher, you're very visible.
Yes.
I mean, you've got the families of all your students. You've got the community. People talk. Now there's social media. So it can be very public. And so it can be really scary if you are in a vulnerable situation.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, everybody in any role makes mistakes, right? But when you're, as you said, you're the one, there's 30 eyes watching you all the time. That mistake sometimes gets magnified or shared, perhaps not fairly, with a little person and a parent who maybe is kind of not understanding the context of the situation either, right? So
yeah. So that's the teaching and the perceived problems of practice. And then I want to talk for a few minutes about healthcare and the perceived problems of practice, because as you are aware, over the years, our families had lots of opportunity of working with hundreds of healthcare professionals across all facets of the healthcare system. And along the way, we observed and experienced professional practices and processes and procedures that impacted us. And I believe that those practices and processes and procedures are put into place with the very, very best intentions. However, some of these practices left our family feeling like the decisions and the processes and the practices were serving the system, and it didn't feel like it was patient-centered or patient-centered, family-centered, and sometimes good intentions can have unintended outcomes. And so here's some of the examples. The first one for us was a biggie because when Ben was young and we were referred to Boston, and we went to the Massachusetts Eye and Ear Institute there. We made the trip. We were taken care of at the hospital. We returned home with a return date of you've got to come back for a follow-up at this particular date. And a couple of days after we were home, we had a courier arrive at the house that delivered to me in my hands a bill of $10,000. And I thought, oh my goodness heavens, what? And I was like mortified, and I was not aware of any kind of support or services or information with respect to how did we get in this place, how did this happen, and where do we go from here? And a friend of mine said, call Handicapped Children's Service, which I had never heard of. Here's a friend of mine that said you should be talking to them, and here's the number. And so I put the number by the phone, and it sat there for 3 days because I was ashamed to call, because my fear was that somebody from Handicapped Children's Services would come to my home and look at our family and then tell me, what? You think your child is handicapped and your child isn't? And then I thought, oh my gosh, they're going to think I'm just in it for money. Or so I had all of this shame and guilt and doubt attached to that. And I was terrified to phone because I had no idea what to expect.
Wait a minute. You're saying you're a mom trying to look after your get them the care that they need. And you think you're going to be judged that they said, oh, these kids aren't handicapped. You're just a bad mom.
Yes.
That's what you thought.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, you are hard on yourself.
I was terrified that they were going to think that I was wanting them to say, agree with me, yes, my boy is handicapped. And he's not, is what they might say to me. So why are you thinking that? Because it had to do with money.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not the very most logical or smart thing to do, but it's really emotional. Sure. And I was really unaware. I had no clue about how things worked out there in this particular situation.
Yeah.
So that was one example.
Mm-hmm.
Another example is transitioning from pediatric to adult care and from acute care to primary care. So here's a real quick example. When Eric was in high school, and he had been really struggling up to this point, but at this particular point in time, he was having what looked to us like convulsions. And we thought, oh my gosh. And both of my husband and I were at work. We got called home, threw him in the car. I phoned his pediatrician that had been working with us since he had been born. And his pediatrician said, I'm going to call ahead to the hospital. He needs to be admitted, and I'll make arrangements for him to be admitted as soon as you arrive. And I said, fabulous. So we got to the hospital, and they said, yes, your doctor has called. We have a bed up on the 4th floor for him. We just have to, get him all checked in. We got immediately taken in the back of the emergency department, and in a room, how they have the separate kind of stalls. And we were there for a little bit. And then all of a sudden, a nurse comes in and she slides the glass door shut. And she said to us, we have a problem. And I said, we do? And she said, yes, your boy is no longer meeting the criteria for pediatric care. He had had his birthday 3 days previous. to this particular day, 3 days, and your pediatrician no longer has jurisdiction for his care here.
Wow.
So your pediatrician cannot admit him to hospital. That was at 11 o'clock in the morning. And we at 2 o'clock in the morning were still in that room, watching them have these convulsions, one right after the other, and saw a string of folks come through asking questions. And what we found out later is that they couldn't decide what service team needed to admit him because they would be responsible, and they were nervous about that because he was complex. Because the service team that admits you is the team that has to discharge you, and they didn't know if they were the ones that should be in charge. It should be somebody else. It should be somebody else. So we sat all that time and watching him suffer.
Wow.
And it was because there was this practice of the rules to pediatric care and adult care.
My goodness, that's horrendous. That's terrible.
Same thing happened to us going from acute care in the hospital out to primary care. No communication. So we had a family physician that was really close to us, that spent a lot of time with us, knew the boys very well, but he wasn't allowed when they went into the hospital to be part of the care team because he was primary care, not acute care. And he couldn't be paid to do that because there wasn't a funding mechanism to pay him to do that, is what we were told. And so all of this stuff happens in the hospital, and then he comes out into the community, and now our family doc hasn't been part of it to be able to follow up and follow through.
Right,
so
exactly. Yeah.
That's a huge problem of practice.
Definitely.
Protocols and procedures. Are we out of time?
No, well, I guess we are 7:30, but we can go a couple more minutes. Where are you at today? Where are you?
We're just about done.
Okay,
just
carry on. You're doing great. Yeah, for 4 or 5 minutes over, that's fine.
Protocols and procedures. So one hospital stay, Eric had, he was in isolation, so everything was kind of monitored what went in his room. Nothing came out of his room. Everything had to be sterilized. You had to wear gowns. You had to wear gloves. And what a dietitian had prescribed Ensure drinks every meal and snack. So he was getting 4 or 5 of these a day. And they were coming in on his tray for his food. And he wasn't drinking them. So they were getting lined up on his windowsill, lined up on his bedside table. And I kept saying, well, how come they continue to bring these when he's not drinking them? And they just kept piling up and piling up. So I said, can we send them back? No, they can't come out of his room because he's in isolation. So we can't take them back out of the room. Could I take them home? No, because that would be breaking protocol because he's in isolation. So I ended up taking a picture of a garbage can full of all of these Ensure drinks that had never been touched. And I asked, why do we keep bringing them if he's not drinking them? Because it's on the chart. Yeah. The dietitian ordered them, and we can't stop bringing them because that order is there.
Wow.
That's an example of a protocol and a procedure that didn't work.
Yeah.
I have others, but we don't have time.
Well, that is like, what a waste, and there's a focus on the process you're going to do and no relation to the end result it's supposed to be providing for your patient, right? So no nutrition that was Ben at that point. That was Ben. Eric. That was Eric. So no nutrition for Eric. Well, like maybe he would have eaten something else or drank something else, right? So how does it make sense just to throw all that away? That's crazy. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. External focus of control. And I've talked about that. Communication. So, from my story that the boys had multiple service teams. There was the cardiac team. There was the orthopedic team. there was the internal medicine team, but they didn't ever sit together and they didn't share information amongst themselves in a conversation. They relied on anything that was charted. So when you, as a service provider, would come to the case, you'd have to spend a tremendous amount of time going through all of this communication that's just written down, instead of sitting in the room and brainstorming and talking about a complex situation.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very frustrating. I mean, we've got tons of documentation where we'd have to tell our story 6-7 times. So tell us about this. And then somebody else would come in. Oh, so can you tell us? And we'd start again and start again and start again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And very closely attached to this is multiple points of contact for the family. So there isn't a point person or a case manager or a navigator that can keep everybody on the same page.
Right. Right.
And in a very complex situation, you really need multiple perspectives, because a situation that we would have is that you, the cardiologist, say, oh, here is the problem and here is the solution, but your solution impacts another system in our boys' bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And then there would be another problem. Oh, and now we'd have to get another team to resolve that internal medicine problem, because the cardiac solution now compromised the gut. And it was just a circle like that. So
yeah, chasing symptoms and not. Wow.
So the medication lists just get longer.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's the healthcare and the teaching perceived problems of practice, and lots of examples, more in the book.
Yes.
And next week is lessons learned.
Woo! Okay, Diane, that was lovely. I'm looking forward to next week. And then we're going to work on something else. We're going to do something else. It'll be fun. Okay.
It will be fun.
It was my pleasure to chat with you again, and we'll see you next week.
You take care, my friend.
All right.
Bye-bye.
See ya. Get a Matson.